room to ask questions. We're talking about February production in our April webinar, and several talking points I want to touch on. I want to start with the fact that February is a second month in a row of production decline. We had production decline from December to January and January to February. Not an enormous decline, about a 1% decline, but it's the first time since December of 10, January of 11 that we've had back-to-back production declines. So it is an unusual event. It was 4 years ago, the last time this happened. And at that time, it was because of incredible winter weather. I don't know if you remember the winter of 10, 11, but it was the worst winter in the oil patch that we had had in probably several decades. Only one increase, one well in terms of wells producing between January and February, which is also a record in terms of the lowest increase that I could find as far as I went back. And the rig count continues to drop. The drop slowed somewhat this month. It dropped 27 rigs January to February, 25 February to March, and 17 so far March to today. So we're seeing that drop slow. In the poll that we do of the major operators, it looks like it's possible there could be another 5 rigs that are on the line or on the margin in terms of possibly being laid down. Surprised really at the rapid rate of rig count decline. Going into this thing in December, operators were telling us that they were going to ladder their rigs down as contracts expired, and that's what we had built our plans around. But as they got into January and February and crude prices were as weak as they were, quite a few operators started actually buying out rig contracts and laying rigs down, which is a very expensive proposition. I don't know if it was bankers or accountants or who it was that was leaning on the operators, but a little bit surprised by that because their intent was to ladder rig count down. And at this point in time, we thought we'd be more in the 120, 130 rig count level. We're at 91. February, pretty much normal weather. We had 7 windy days and 9 very cold days. And little or no precipitation in the month of February. We saw another increase of 75 uncompleted wells. We're now at 900 wells drilled but not completed. And that is a record number. So we're very quickly approaching that number that we think is going to be the June number of 1,000 or 1,000 plus wells, slightly over 1,000. That will be waiting on completion as we roll into June, anticipating the big trigger also hitting the 1st of June. On Fort Berthold, a 50% drop in rig count from last month. So a very large drop in rig count on Fort Berthold, larger proportionally than anywhere else in the state. And so we saw operators there really pull back big time this last month in terms of rig count. Really good news on the gas capture front. Gas capture jumped to 81%. And Tioga Gas Plant was able to increase their inlet to 84% of capacity. They're still restrained at Lake Sakakawea, but that's a really important increase. And then lastly, a lot of activity on the federal regulatory front. And we'll kind of finish up there. And talk a little bit about legislation, and then we'll open it up for questions. On the federal regulatory front, the BLM did publish their final hydraulic fracturing rule for federal and Indian lands March 26th. That means it will take effect unless there is an injunction issued by the court on June 26th. North Dakota, as you know, has joined Wyoming and intervened in the court action against that rule. And one of the points of that action is a request for a temporary restraining order or an injunction to prevent that rule from going into effect until the matters that are addressed in the lawsuit can be worked out by the courts. And we can talk about that in more detail if you'd like to. There are several other matters out there in terms of conflicts between the state, ag industry and energy industry and federal regulatory agencies. And the legislature is addressing those through a couple of pieces of legislation, House Bill 1432 and House Resolution 3009. They're setting up a process to not only litigate, but also generate some better science in some areas. And we can talk about that a little bit too, but that's going to address the EPA Toxic Substances Control Act action, the Obama administration announcement about methane controls, EPA and Corps of Engineers talking about waters of the U.S., and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Endangered Species Act. So that legislation is modeled largely after Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma, who have set up some pretty successful programs in dealing with particularly the Endangered Species Act. Then the last thing I want to touch on is the announcement that was made this morning over at the legislature. They passed House Bill 1358 and 1390 this morning. And they passed late last week Senate Bill 2271, which is on the governor's desk. Those three bills are an interesting package in terms of changing regulation in North Dakota. There are a lot of pieces and parts to them. 2271, the one that's on the governor's desk, sets up a mediation program or an ombudsman program within the Ag Department for resolving pipeline right-of-way issues. And it's funded out of a fund that the Industrial Commission oversees through the Department of Mineral Resources, the Abandoned Well Plugging and Site Restoration Fund. So there's $400,000 will be transferred to that pilot program in 2271. And then House Bill 1358 has lots of pieces and parts. Probably the primary one is a major increase in regulation of gathering pipelines. As you know, 2 years ago, the legislature took a baby step into gathering pipeline regulation by requiring gathering pipelines to report their location and several attributes about them to the Industrial Commission, and allowing the Commission to adopt some pretty basic rules. This now is going to increase the oversight of gathering pipelines substantially, with more inspection, engineering design drawings being available upon request, monitoring systems, a pilot program through EERC to develop new technologies or screen technologies for leak detection and pipeline monitoring, a pilot program through EERC on soil remediation to clean up pipeline spills, a legacy cleanup project through the Department of Mineral Resources. So all in all, these bills are tapping the Abandoned Well Plugging and Site Restoration Fund for about $4.3 million that's going to go into pipeline regulation, pilot studies, legacy cleanup studies, that kind of thing. And then House Bill 1390 introduces the state of North Dakota into oil field waste recycling. About a year ago, we took a group of people down to Texas to look at drill cuttings and saltwater recycling operations down near San Antonio. And the end result is this legislation passing in a pilot program for 2 years to allow companies to set up drill cutting recycling operations and recycle those drill cuttings into things like road base. So three very big pieces of legislation, very new ideas and concepts for the state of North Dakota, and a significant amount of money being spent, $4.3 million going into those programs to really improve how we deal with oil field waste, oil field spills, and pipeline regulation here in the state. So with that, I will stop and take questions. There's a lot happening this month.
I have 2 questions on the legislation. Okay, so the one is the mediation program at the Ag Department. How is it different than what he's been doing now?
What he's been doing right now is a more of a formal mediation program where both parties have to agree to mediate their dispute, and that will still be available to people who use the ombudsman. But the ombudsman is supposed to be a landowner representative. They are going to be paid out of this $400,000. The intent is to hire local contractors. They may be people that work for the NRDC or the local extension office. And their job is going to be to assist the landowner in communicating what they want in their easement, how they want the pipeline right-of-way reclamation to be handled, and all of those kind of conversations. So it really is going to be a landowner advocate position, whereas mediation was intended to be a neutral party, and both parties had to volunteer to go into mediation. They'll still be able to do that. If at the end of the ombudsman's work, there's still a dispute, they can go to ag mediation to that program. But this is really a person who is going to be an advocate for the landowner.
And then my second question is on the 1358. Are you concerned that there's no real regulation on the monitoring, like the technology part of it, until ERC is done? Does that concern you any, or do you think the industry is going to do something?
I think that the technology is changing so rapidly that the idea of having a short-term study followed by rulemaking is a good idea. When the bill started, and I should have repeated the question, I apologize. When the bill started, it was locking in old technologies or current technologies, flow meters and pressure cutoff switches, which most people already use, maybe not as effectively as possible. For example, the Blacktail Creek spill had that technology in place, and yet it wasn't adequate. And so I think it's important to note that the bill says as soon as that study's done, the Industrial Commission shall write rules based on that study. So there isn't any doubt what's going to happen after December 1st.
So continue along those lines. Does this new legislation, could it reduce the number of spills? And if a measure like this has been passed in 2013, could Blacktail Creek have been prevented?
I think so. One of the big differences between the current paradigm and what this legislation does is now our pipeline inspectors have the opportunity when they see construction going on to do two things. One is require the operator of the pipeline to give us the engineering drawings and the list of private inspectors that they're using on the pipeline and their plan for leak monitoring and leak detection up front while the pipeline is being built, so that from an inspection side, we can look at things like creek crossings. We can observe the actual ditching and construction of the pipeline. And not only that, we can ride with these private inspectors and maintain our list of who's doing a good job and who's not doing a good job. So it's an enormous change from the way things were before. The way things were before, the pipeline was built, put into service, and they had 180 days to tell us what it was that they built. So 6 months later, what was when the data came in. If you recall the Blacktail spill, that's about how long the pipeline lasted before it leaked. And so about the time that the data was coming in on what they had built, the pipeline had already sprung a leak. In this case, we have real-time inspection and construction supervision and regulation as things go forward. There is going to be a delay. It's going to take probably a year from now to get rules in place as a result of the EERC study. So there's still going to be some time lag on implementing rules for what kind of monitoring and leak detection should be installed on pipelines. And then, as you heard Representative Porter, trying to go back on existing pipelines may require another legislative session in order to get that kind of authority. So.
If you have a question on legislation, otherwise I have one here. Okay. Sticking with that, what about additional staff to focus on pipelines?
Great question. Additional staff, when we looked at the fiscal note for 1358, we arrived at basically 8 FTEs in total that would be required to correctly implement this program. Now, 6 of those overlap with some other requests that we had in our base budget. So they're not like a 100% person. So, for example, the reclamation specialist will cover several of the areas within 1358 and some existing requirements. So the net is a +2. But overall, the program requires, to do it right, is going to require 8 people. The Senate provided that in their version of our budget, which the House did not concur with. And so we're going to conference committee, and we'll see where we end up.
Okay, we're good with legislation. Nick, do you have one on legislation? Otherwise, I'm going to change topic.
No, I was about production.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We've had the production decrease the last couple of months. I guess what are you kind of seeing in the next, 60 to 90 days in terms of production? Now we have to, well, completions down, rigs and everything down. Are we going to be seeing substantial more decrease in the next few months before the big trigger? Or, what are you thinking here?
The question was, what do we see happening next 60 to 90 days in production? And I do anticipate month-to-month 1 to 2% declines for March, April, and May. As we've stated before, we're going to enter June likely with the big trigger kicking in with about 1,000 wells in an unfracked inventory and 125 wells that have to be out of that inventory that have to be brought on in the month of June. And so I think we're going to see continued production decline through May. And then I think we'll see a big catch-up in June, which likely will take us back up pretty close to that 1.2 million barrel a day mark, is my anticipation.
So different thoughts then from, there are certain predictions out there for a 5% decline by year-end 2016.
Yes, our thoughts differ from that. I know that it's going to be a seesaw pattern, and it's going to be a little bit tough to track. But at the same time that we went through the records and took a look at 125 wells having to be brought on in June, I believe there's another 200 or so that have to be brought on in December. So I think that's going to offset the intermediate month declines, and we really expect to exit 2015 pretty close to where we entered. Maybe down a little bit, but we don't think it'll be down 5%.
Did you have something, Ben?
I was just wondering, we talked about storage recently. Is this huge surge in production in June going to make that pump worse?
Good question. The question was talking about the whole storage capacity issue and what that's doing to oil prices. And I checked the storage situation this morning. We're still very near the top, and we're at record levels across the country by far. One of the factors that I discovered last week, I guess it was, that I had not been incorporating into this was at the same time we were building an enormous amount of crude oil storage, we were drawing gasoline storage down to near record lows. And so we're now starting to see refiners ramp up and put a draw on that crude oil storage to rebuild gasoline stocks as we go into the summer months. So I think that's going to rescue the situation from the June production surge. I think we expect that drawdown will have pulled crude oil stocks down enough that they can accommodate the June production increase.
Okay. Any indication about why such a dramatic pullback on Fort Berthold?
I think yes, the production decrease or the rig count decrease on Fort Berthold was really, increased. How can you have an increased decrease? I need to come up with a better word than that. It was really magnified by a decision from the tax department that the little trigger does not apply to Fort Berthold wells. And so there was a legal decision made that the bill that was passed back in 2009 that implemented the little trigger excluded Fort Berthold lands. So companies really refocused their efforts off the reservation. That had a major negative impact and increased the drop in rig count on Fort Berthold versus off Fort Berthold. It shifted that paradigm quite a bit because that hadn't happened through January, but that decision came out. I'm pretty sure it came out right around mid-February.
Is there the gas capture percentages are pretty high. Is there anything besides the Tioga gas plant increasing? Is there other things that happened that got that up so much?
I think there were several things on the gas capture. Why are the gas capture numbers as high as they are? We've seen a lot more well site units put into place, and then we've seen a lot of focus on increased compressor capacity in the core Bakken area. So One Oak and Highland in particular, along with Hess, all did major compression projects in that Hawkeye Antelope area and have more projects planned for this summer to increase the takeaway capacity. They have enough plant capacity, but they didn't have enough compression to move the gas out of Northeast McKenzie County. But we saw 3 projects come online, and there's, I think, 3 more that will be coming on around mid-year. So mostly it's due to that, is increased compression.
And for these on-site units, is it still just 2 or 3 companies that they're really using? Or remember the EERC had that huge list of all these different companies that wanted to capture the gas? And
Yes.
is there a variety out there, or is it?
No, the question was, is it still just a very small number of well site processing units? And yes, it's still just a handful. There are 2 major ones who are getting the lion's share of the business, and then there's 3 or 4 others. But it is just a handful of successful technologies that have been implemented at the well sites, and they've had some real difficulties ironing out operation problems, but I think they're getting a lot better at it.
Any estimate on production, how much production has been curtailed to meet gas capture?
Yeah, we do have a couple of estimates. One of the things I want to share is what we told operators they had to do. And as it stands right now, we have ordered production curtailment of 1,800 barrels a day. In addition to that, the reports from the operators indicate there's in the neighborhood of another 7,000 barrels a day that they have self-curtailed in order to reach the gas capture goals. So you're talking about pretty close to 9,000 barrels a day that's curtailed.
That number was actually, I think, a little bit less, a few thousand less than the previous couple of months. Are we seeing capacity and everything improving at this point? Are we expecting to maintain some of these percentages? Are we catching up?
So the question was, that number is around 3,000 barrels a day less than what we've reported. You know, we reported 12 to 13,000 in previous months. And I think part of it is the decline in completions along with the additional compressor capacity. So we've had everything working in our favor in terms of less curtailments and better gas capture. But as we come into the summer months and as we hit this June completion surge, I think we're going to see those curtailments creep back up into that 12, 13,000 barrel a day range. That would be our anticipation. Even with the compression projects just are going to lag that by a month or 2. And so I think by June, we'll see more curtailments again in order to achieve the gas capture goals.
Sticking on curtailment, any ramifications to production due to oil conditioning, and how did the kickoff of oil conditioning go?
We haven't yet quantified what the impacts on production are. As you know, oil conditioning just kicked in 2 weeks ago. And so far, the results are going very well. We have surveyed a little bit over 1,000 heater treaters, and we have discovered about 90% compliance. So about 10% of the heater treaters either weren't properly adjusted or aren't capable of reaching the temperatures with the way they're installed or designed. So those operators have requested more time to get those heater treaters into compliance. And what we've required in the meantime is that then they run a vapor pressure test to prove that they're below the 13.7. So all of those roughly 100, a little over 100 that weren't in compliance on temperature and pressure, we've required them to run a vapor pressure test to show that they were in compliance while they buy some and install some additional equipment to get in compliance the other way. We have just over 600 vapor pressure tests that have come in since the last week of March, and we're just under 99% compliant on that. So a little over 1% of those vapor pressure tests are coming in too high. In those cases, we're immediately notifying the operator, and we're giving them 48 hours to adjust their equipment to do something different in their process and retest. And I haven't followed up to see how those retests have gone. I know anecdotally, I talked to Mr. Tabor yesterday, and he said the majority of the retests are coming in below the 13.7. But interestingly enough, there were heater treaters out of compliance, and a little over 1% of the vapor pressure tests were significantly above the 13.7, have to be adjusted.
Okay, this doesn't transition as well, but everything was flowing so nicely. Let's go back to producers that haven't completed wells. Any indication on who is contributing to the 900 uncompleted wells? And what happens if they don't bring those wells on within the time frame that they need to?
We've done a little bit of work in that area, but because there are so many wells on confidential status that fall in that category, we're not really able to publish operator by operator numbers. We've provided some assistance to some service companies on how to do that, and we are implementing a new well category because there are so many. Sometime in the next month or so, there's going to be a new well status called NC, not completed. And you'll be able to go on our website and see who has NC wells. Now, what's on our website won't include the wells on confidential status, so it'll be not a full or complete list. Probably the company with the largest inventory is EOG. And they have a significant number in partial field. They've been doing a lot of increased density drilling there, and they have, those are tremendously productive wells. And so they are able to drill a lot of wells and maintain production and still bank a lot of wells for future price increases. So anyway, we don't publish the numbers just because there's so many in confidential status.
What about after that year time frame, or the wells that can't be brought on in June? What happens to those wells?
Thank you. Yeah, we've been having conversations with the operators and let them know that there's paperwork due here as they approach that 1 year time frame. And they have two options: complete the well and put it on production, or justify to the commission that you're going to temporarily abandon the well. And they could potentially buy another year out of that temporary abandonment of the well, but that requires some operations on the well and some pressure testing and a significant amount of paperwork. So we're hoping that will discourage a lot of that, but there will be some of that. So at the end of the year, it's either put it on production or go through the regulatory process of doing a temporary abandonment, which could buy them another year if they needed it.
All right, I'm right at a half an hour, and I got one question. Go for it, Mary Kate. Otherwise, I'm done with questions on the webinar.
And this might be a bad question because it involves me doing some math, and that is not my strong suit. So
Not for any reporter.
I know. But if I could just ask, the decrease from January to February is like roughly 14,000 barrels per day. And you said that the gas capture for either mandated or volunteer curtailment was around 9,000. So would you say that that played a major role in the decrease between the two?
Yeah, the question was gas capture and its impact on the decrease. And I do believe that it is a significant part of that the decrease would have been less than half of what it was in the absence of gas capture requirements. But I think, you know, the public and North Dakota citizens were very firm in what they wanted from this industry, and they wanted less flaring. And I think I am just really pleased to see the numbers and be able to look back and say, you know, wow, what we did over the last year in terms of inventing a whole new way of reducing flaring and controlling production and excess flaring is really working. So yeah, I think that more than half of the drop in production January to February is probably due to gas capture curtailments, but it's a necessary part of the business if you're going to reduce flaring to 10%, which is the ultimate goal.
One tiny follow-up question. When was the last time we've had 80% capture?
That's a fantastic question. When was the last time we had 80% capture? And I don't know the answer to that, Ben. Thank you for asking.
It's tough in terms of the Basin.
It is, but I think it's got to go probably all the way back to 2011 sometime. But we'll get you that number. That's a good question.
All right. With that, we'll hang out and let Mr. Kringstad take the stage, or the hot seat, whichever you prefer.
I'll think that's my number two.
Okay, yep, I'll find out when it is, and I'll get that to everybody, that flaring percentage. Yeah. Or capture
Last
percentage.
time capture
Yeah.
was above 80%.
Yes. All righty, Mr. Kringstad, take it away, sir.
All right, well, good morning. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Just a quick update on production around the Williston Basin. I was not able to pull up updated production for Montana and South Dakota for the months of January, February. So we're still anticipating somewhere in that 1.25 million barrels of crude oil production per day being produced in the region and then having to be moved out of the region. An update on slide 4 on how that crude oil is being moved. The estimates shifted slightly for February. A couple different factors play into that, but you can see, again, about 45% of the oil being moved by pipeline, 55% estimated moving out by rail car. When we look at those percentage shifts over time, again, you can see that it's been trending here for the last 6 months or so, decreasing market share on the rail side and increasing market share on the pipeline side. And so as we go forward, I'll touch on a couple different factors that are at play. And then, you know, again, going forward, it's difficult based on market conditions, different projects and production levels, not what that's going to look like, but we can explain some of what we saw in February with a few different items. So February, the estimated rail production, or I'm sorry, rail export out of the region decreased again. We saw that estimated peak around that November, December time period when production was at its highest. So a couple different factors that played into that January, February decrease. First and foremost was the production decrease that we saw overall in the region. Secondly, here in February, the Double H pipeline went into service, and so that had an impact on reducing those rail estimates, and then as well, imports from Canada. And so I don't have it in the set of slides, but the handout and on my monthly update that goes online one of those charts shows how much crude oil is being trucked in from Canada. And so there's about a 50,000 barrel a day difference between that November, December timeframe to February. So a significant decrease in the amount of truck traffic coming into North Dakota for that crude oil to move out of our system. So those factors all playing into that reduction in the estimated rail volumes. On the market pricing, again, just an update on that Brent WTI spread. This was as of this morning. I think last month, this press event, it was around $10 spread between Brent WTI. That has narrowed down to about the 5 or 6, and that's kind of where it's been trending here the last couple weeks or so. One project update that I thought was worth mentioning. This was one that I had focused on last meeting or last press event. There has been a shift in the targeted in-service date for this project. It was moved from 2018 now to the year 2020 for targeted in-service by TransCanada on that Energy East system. So again, the takeaway capacity then for North Dakota onto that system then being delayed, as well as that Energy East system as a whole gets pushed back. And the other shift, the Quebec marine terminal that was proposed, and you can see it on this map, that has been taken off the table as well. So there's going to be some alterations made to this project as a whole, that the NEB in Canada on the regulatory side will then be involved with making those shifts and those changes. On the flaring side, as Lynn mentioned earlier, we did see the decrease. Again, this is non-confidential data, but we were looking at, again, that decrease month over month. And then again, relative sizes where that challenge sits in North Dakota, not a big change. Again, majority of that gas being flared from those wells that are connected to the gas gathering systems. And then on gas capture connections in February as well as January, we were seeing the number of gas connections keeping up with the new wells selling gas for that month, or producing gas for that month. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, I'll ask again. I seem to ask it every month. Sandpiper, anything new?
So the recent news on the question was about Sandpiper, any updates? And so there was some information that just came out. A judge made a statement supporting the Sandpiper project and its need and necessity in the state of Minnesota. So that is not the end all. It still goes through the Minnesota Public Utility Commission for that final approval. But supporters of that project have seen that as a good step in the right direction, as the Public Utility Commission has to make their decision here in the coming months as far as the need of the system and then getting into the actual route determination. So there has been some movement forward, but it's still ultimately in the regulatory phase with some definite uncertainty at this point.
Is that an ALJ or is that in a courts?
As far as the
judge that you mentioned.
As far as his position, is that the question? Yeah, I'm not familiar with how their structure is, so yeah, no, sorry. Yes?
If I could ask, crude oil storage, any impact to whether people are going pipeline, rail, not affecting at all?
The question was on the storage situation around the U.S. Storage volumes across the U.S. are at high levels, and so it's not just unique to the Cushing market. So the storage around the U.S. as a whole has been filling up. So I don't know that there's been any noticeable shift in the way that we've kind of looked back and saw production move out of the region. But it's a consideration, obviously, for all those folks as far as where they're going to market that crude oil, where it's going to get stored, where it's going to be refined. So,
any feel on why pipeline exports increased as the spread widened?
Right. So if we notice the dotted line, so that Brent WTI spread, again, that shift that we saw in February, that is kind of an anomaly. I just got these numbers crunched last night and this morning, so I've still scratched my head a little bit if it's, so those different factors, the Double H pipeline going into service, and so barrels that were committed on that system. You've got the other consideration of, again, that decrease in truck imports from Canada, and then the overall production decrease. And so no real conclusion at this point other than just knowing what some of those factors were for February. I think I'm going to definitely watch that here in the coming months to see if there's any type of a trend that we're seeing, or if this is one blip in the marketing dynamics that we've seen.
Anything else? Go ahead.
I maybe just ask you in the most like succinct way, sorry if it's elementary, but to describe this sort of spread and the relationship and the trend that creates in terms of movement.
Right, so the question was on just kind of summarizing the spread between Brent WTI pricing. And so let me pull up. So that Brent pricing, again, if you quote unquote the world oil price, those waterborne shipments that are come into the coastal refining centers either on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, those were always hand in hand. The price of a U.S. barrel in the mid-continent was typically the same price within pennies of what the Brent oil price was. A number of years ago, we saw those two diverge from each other, and we saw a spread widen between what the world oil price was and what the mid-continent U.S. price was. That was a result of growing volumes of U.S. production, growing storage in the Cushing area. So again, if you're a barrel of oil in North Dakota and you're a shipper and own that barrel, you're trying to figure out, where do I send this? You know, any product that you're selling, if it's chairs or computers, you're going to want to send it to the highest priced market. And so in this case, when that spread is wide, those coastal refineries are tied to those higher priced markets. And so again, if you're selling your commodity, you're going to want to get it to the highest priced market possible. So that dynamic of the pricing in the U.S. has been fluctuating here over the last number of years. We have seen a trend historically that as that spread widened, there was even more incentive to get it to those coastal markets. And the only way of getting it to those coastal places was by rail car. We don't have pipeline access to the East Coast, and we're starting to get more connectivity to the Gulf Coast. But so those are all factors that work. So
Thanks for explaining that.
yep.
Any idea what a good chair goes for on the East Coast?
Ooh, a good share. $75.
All righty. With that, I don't see any other questions, so we will end this month's Director's Cut. Just so y'all know, we are updating the Information Center on our website. So we're now going to be posting the recording on our website. We tried that earlier, and we lost a person, so now we got a person back. So we'll be putting those on our website, and look for that later today. So thanks, everyone.
Did you get that number?
I did.
Oh, yes, and I sent that. I sent it to folks on the recording. It was July 2010.
July of 2010.
The last time I was here.
That we were about 80%. A long time ago in our world.